So what I want to be able to do is to focus our policy, our resources, our activities on that lower right-hand quadrant. The difficulty with the world we live in now, that it looks like we're going to be living in as we go into the future, is it's a much less stable environment with questionable sources of productivity growth. We think we know what we can do if we have the resources, but we certainly don't have it on the shelf at the moment. And what this new, unstable, uncertain environment is doing is pushing us into the upper left quadrant, into the short-run macro focus, where policymakers, if they worry at all about the poor in the short run, are thinking about safety nets and food aid. They're not thinking about long-run investment and economic growth and connecting the poor in an inclusive, pro-poor kind of a way. And the danger is, as you focus your policies on the short run and you focus your projects vis-a-vis the poor on short-run issues, you jeopardize economic growth. We know economic growth requires a long investment horizon. It requires policy and infrastructure and research that takes a long time to pay off. So the more we focus our activities back up on the short-run macro questions, the less money, the less policy attention, the less reality we're going to have to focus on the lower right. I think that's the scary thing going forward. Climate change does that. I think the nature of financial markets is creating more instability. And so I'm very concerned that if we don't understand the impact of the unstable and uncertain world that we're in, and which my sense is going to get worse, then we're probably not going to be solving the problem that we actually need to be solving, which is figuring out how to get poor households into a sustainable growth path and raise their productivity so that they provide their own food security. How much longer do I have, Tim? 10 minutes. Not an hour? 10 minutes. Oh. I'm programmed for an hour and I can't do that. Very quickly. I'm going to skip the historical. Tim said I could skip the 50s and 60s, and that meant skipping the 1750s and the 1760s. I'm going to skip the historical perspective that I was planning to provide, but just with 3 quick points. We've made enormous gains in food security over the last half century in terms of how many people have reasonably secure access to food. We don't want to throw out our understanding of what brought that achievement about. And I think there were 3 things. First of all was a political mandate, especially in Asia, to be sure your people got fed. Didn't matter whether you were a dictator, popularly elected, whatever kind of government. The mandate to govern in Asia includes a mandate to be sure people are fed. There's some really awful exceptions to my rule, but by and large, Asia's done pretty well in taking food security seriously as a government mandate. Second, we've had a technological revolution that allowed small farmers to participate. It didn't have to happen that way. But again, in Asia, just because of the reality of the demographic context, you couldn't feed your country unless you could get small farmers to do most of the heavy lifting. And so finding ways for the Green Revolution to reach small farmers, all the inputs that had to go out, then all the surpluses that had to come back, meant you had to have a marketing system. Whether you liked it or not, you had to have a private sector. And let's face it, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there's a lot of countries that did not want active private sectors. But you didn't really have any choice. There's too many decisions, too turnovers of product that had to happen, you basically had to figure out ways to make a rural market operate. And third, let's just give credit to economic growth. Economic growth raises the possibilities of people to do things other than just get by with enough food. And having that surplus, what economists would call just Engel's law, you know, you go from spending 60% or 70% of your budget on food to spending 40 and 30 and 20%, and you're able to cushion then instability in the food system just because you've got enough income to do that. So that's, but let me be clear, that economic growth early on was stimulated by rapid productivity growth in agriculture. Agriculture was really a driver of that growth process. What has changed? So that's sort of how we got where we are, but the world really looks very different at the moment. What's changed is we've had a massive structural transformation in the economies of most of Asia and a radically different role for rice in that economy. We have a richer Asia, we have a more urban Asia, and just a better fed Asia. That's because we've had significant diversification within agriculture in both production and in consumption. International trade has played a surprisingly modest role in that agricultural transformation, but an important role at the margin. And I'm going to say some things about the world rice economy and world rice trade in a moment that make me feel that the whole international trade picture is dicey right now. We're going to hear tomorrow from Tom Reardon on the changes in modern supply chains and the role of supermarkets. I just want us to realize that in Asia, there has been a fundamental revolution in where people buy their food. It's moving into rural areas, it's moving into poor neighborhoods. Modern supply chains change how small farmers participate in their food system. And we have an enormous challenge in front of us to figure out how we're going to use modern supply chains and supermarkets as our retail suppliers and still keep small farmers as efficient, low-cost producers in that supply chain. We will figure out a way to do that in Asia because there isn't any alternative. Latin America did not figure out how to do that, and they're paying that price. I'll let Tom spend more time on that tomorrow. And the third thing that has changed is what I take to be the reality of climate change in at least the dimension of increased instability and uncertainty. I don't want to do which scientific model is right or wrong, but I think virtually everybody agrees that we are seeing a less stable weather pattern out of that climate change, and we're just much less certain about the nature of the agroecological systems that we're going to have to operate with as we go forward.